She handed me divorce papers the day before our anniversary, smiling like she just won the lottery. Called me weak when I signed without a fight. 3 months later, I inherited $8 million from the uncle she called irrelevant. Then she showed up at my bank with a lawyer, still smiling. My name is Arthur Stone. I'm 59 years old, and I've spent the last 35 years with a wrench in my hand and grease under my fingernails. Built my business from nothing, one leaky faucet at a time. 22 years married to Eleanor. Raised 2 kids, Mark and Sarah, and thought I was doing everything right. Paid the bills on time. Showed up when I said I would. Never raised my voice unless a rookie was about to electrocute himself with a wet drill. Guess that wasn't enough. The envelope came on a Tuesday. Not hand-delivered with some dramatic speech. Just sitting on the kitchen counter next to the coffee maker when I got home from a job in Riverside. Thick manila paper, the expensive kind lawyers use when they want you to know you're screwed before you even open it. Eleanor was standing by the window, arms crossed, wearing that navy blazer she bought last spring. The one that costs more than my monthly truck payment. You should read that, Eleanor said, not looking at me. Her voice was flat, rehearsed. I picked up the envelope, felt the weight of it. Too many pages for anything good. What is this? I asked. Divorce papers, she said, finally turning to face me. I filed yesterday, day before our anniversary. Actually seemed cleaner that way. My hands went still. The envelope suddenly felt like it weighed 50 pounds. Cleaner, I repeated. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Arthur, Eleanor continued, smoothing her blazer. I've kept everything straightforward. Fair division, no fighting. Just sign, and we can both move forward. I looked at her, really looked at her, the woman I'd met at a community fundraiser back in 1993, who'd laughed at my terrible jokes, and didn't mind that I smelled like pipe dope and copper. She wasn't that woman anymore. This person standing in front of me was polished, distant, like she'd been practicing this moment in a mirror. You've been planning this, I said. We've been drifting for years, she replied. You know it. I know it. This is just making it official. I opened the envelope, scanned the first page. Petition for dissolution of marriage. My eyes caught on the date, filed one day before our 22nd anniversary. The reservations I'd made at Giovanni's were still in my phone. The bracelet I bought her was wrapped and hidden in my toolbox in the garage. I'm not fighting this, I said quietly, setting the papers on the counter. Eleanor blinked, surprised. You're not. No. I grabbed a pen from the drawer, flipped through the pages, and started signing. Every page, every clause, every polite legal phrase that translated to you're not worth fighting for. My hand didn't shake. That seemed to bother her more than anything. That's it, she asked. You're just going to sign. I looked up at her. What did you expect, Eleanor? Begging. Tears. You made your choice. I'm making mine. Her face tightened, but she didn't respond. I finished signing, slid the papers back into the envelope, and handed it to her. I'll be out by the weekend, I said, walking past her toward the stairs. Behind me, I heard her exhale. Something between relief and disappointment, but I didn't turn around. Didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing whatever she thought she'd see. By Friday, I was gone. The apartment I rented was nothing special. 3rd floor walk up on the east side of town, above a laundromat that hummed until midnight. In a corner store that sold lottery tickets and stale coffee. The carpet was worn thin in patches. The refrigerator made sounds like it was dying, and the bathroom faucet dripped no matter how tight I turned it. Ironic considering my line of work, but I left it alone. It reminded me I was still breathing. I'd already packed 2 weeks before Eleanor handed me those papers. Call intuition or just good sense. But when your wives start coming, home smelling like cologne that isn't yours, you start making contingency plans. 3 duffel bags, a box of tools, my father's old recliner, and a lamp I bought at a garage sale 15 years ago. That was it. Everything else, the house, the furniture, the life we built, I let her keep it. Not because I was generous, because I didn't want to fight over things that didn't matter anymore. Mark called me the day after I moved out. My son's voice came through the phone tight and confused. Dad, what the hell happened? Mark asked. Your mother and I are getting divorced, I said, setting down the wrench I've been using to tighten the kitchen sink in my new place. She filed. I signed. That's all there is to it. That's all there is to it, Mark repeated, his voice rising. You were married for over 20 years. You don't just walk away like it's nothing. I didn't walk away, son. I replied calmly. Your mother did. I'm just respecting her decision. There was silence on the other end. Then Mark spoke again, harder this time. Mom said he gave up. Said he didn't even try to fight for the marriage. I closed my eyes, felt the familiar burn of frustration in my chest. Of course she did. Your mother can say whatever she wants, Mark. I'm not going to argue with her version of events. You're 28. You'll figure out the truth on your own. So that's it. You're just done. My son pressed. Yeah, I said quietly. I'm done. He hung up without saying goodbye. I stood there in my cramped kitchen, phone in one hand, wrench in the other, and wondered how long it would take before he realized I wasn't the villain in this story. Sarah called 2 days later. My daughter's voice was softer, more measured. She worked at a law firm downtown, saw paperwork like this every week, understood the mechanics of dissolution, even if she didn't understand the why. Dad, are you okay? Sarah asked. I'm fine, sweetheart. I told her, meaning it more than I expected. Mom's telling everyone you just quit, she said carefully, that you didn't even want to talk about it. What do you think? I asked. Sarah paused. I think there's more to this story than she's saying. Smart girl. Always have been. You're right, I said. But it's not your burden to carry. This is between me and your mother. I love you, Dad, Sarah said quietly. I love you too, Sarah, more than you know. When she hung up, I sat in my father's old recliner and stared at the water-stained ceiling. The drip from the bathroom faucet echoed in silence. And for the first time in weeks, I smiled because I knew something Eleanor didn't. I knew how to wait. Eleanor wasted no time building her new narrative. Within a week of me moving out, her social media became a carefully curated gallery of liberation. Photos of her at the salon she managed surrounded by smiling clients and expensive hair products. Pictures from a wine-tasting event downtown where she posed with people I'd never seen before. One post showed her on someone's boat. Champagne glass raised. Caption reading new chapters. New energy. The comments rolled in like applause. You deserve this. Finally living your truth. Glowing. I didn't comment. Didn't react. Just watch from a distance. The way you watch a storm forming on the horizon. You don't run toward it. You just make sure your foundation is solid. What she didn't post were the cracks forming in her perfect picture. Sarah mentioned during one of our weekly coffee meetups that Eleanor had been asking about my schedule, where I was living, whether I'd hired an attorney yet. My daughter sat across from me at the diner near my apartment, stirring sugar into her coffee with a troubled expression. She's nervous, Dad, Sarah said quietly. I can tell about what? I asked, cutting into a stack of pancakes. About you, Sarah replied. She expected you to fall apart, to call her, to beg something, but you didn't. And now she doesn't know what you're thinking. I took a sip of coffee. Consider my words carefully. What I'm thinking isn't her business anymore. Dad. Sarah leaned forward, lowering her voice. There's something else. I saw paperwork at the firm yesterday. Mom's attorney filed a motion to revisit the asset division. They're claiming you had business income during the marriage. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. That's a lie. I know, Sarah said. But they're fishing, trying to find something to leverage. I set my fork down, looked at my daughter, 25 years old, sharp as a blade, already seeing the game for what it was. Let them fish, I said calmly. They won't find anything because there's nothing to find. What about Uncle Walter? Sarah asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. I went still. Walter Reed, my mother's brother. The man who'd built a plumbing supply empire from nothing and spent the last decade living like a hermit in a mansion outside Philadelphia. We'd stayed in touch over the years, visits every few months, phone calls on holidays. Eleanor had always dismissed him as eccentric and irrelevant. What about him? I asked carefully. His health, Sarah said. I heard from Aunt Helen that he's not doing well, and I know you've been visiting him more than you tell people. I held my daughter's gaze. Walter's my uncle. I visit because I care about him, not because I expect anything. Sarah nodded slowly, but something in her eyes told me she understood more than she was saying. Just be careful, Dad. Mom's watching everything you do now. Let her watch. I replied, finishing my coffee. She won't see what matters until it's too late. We parted ways outside the diner. As I drove back to my apartment, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered, Mr. Stone, this is David Chun, attorney for the estate of Walter Reed. I'm calling to inform you that your uncle passed away yesterday morning. I'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss his will. You're named as the sole beneficiary. I pulled over to the side of the road, gripping the steering wheel. Everything had just changed. 3 months. That's how long it took between Eleanor filing for divorce and the phone call that would rewrite everything. 90 days of silence, of letting her think she'd outmaneuvered me, of watching her build a life she thought I couldn't touch. 90 days of working my routes, fixing broken pipes, keeping my head down, and waiting. David Chin's office was in Center City, 14th floor of a building that smelled like old money and polished mahogany. The attorney himself was late 50s, gray hair, expensive suit, the kind of man who charged by the minute and made it worth every penny. Mr. Stone, David said, shaking my hand firmly. Thank you for coming on such short notice. Please sit. I sat across from his desk, hands folded in my lap. David opened a leather folder, pulled out several documents. Your Uncle Walter was very specific in his instructions. David began. He left his entire estate to you. No conditions, no trusts, no complications. Everything transfers directly upon probate clearance. How much are we talking about? I asked. David slid a paper across the desk. Total liquid assets, investment portfolios, and the proceeds from the sale of his manufacturing company come to $8 million. The number sat between us like a live wire. $8 million. I've been living off $40,000 a year, fixing toilets and replacing water heaters. And now I was sitting in an office being told I was a millionaire 8 times over. The timing, I said slowly, is important. David nodded. I'm aware of your recent divorce filing. The proceedings were finalized 2 weeks ago. Correct. Correct. I confirmed. Then this inheritance is entirely separate from any marital assets, David explained. Your ex-wife has no legal claim to it whatsoever. Your uncle made sure the timing was documented. He'd been planning this for months, waiting for the right moment. I leaned back in the chair, processing. Walter had known. Somehow he'd known what Eleanor was planning before I did. Those visits, those long conversations about family and loyalty, he'd been preparing me without me realizing it. There's one more thing, David continued. Your uncle left a sealed letter for you. He asked that I give it to you personally. He handed me an envelope, my name written in Walter's shaky handwriting across the front. I opened it carefully, unfolded the single page inside. Arthur, the letter read. If you're reading this, then everything has happened the way I suspected it would. Your wife never saw your worth. She saw a simple man with dirty hands and a modest income. She didn't see the strength, the integrity, the patience that makes a man truly wealthy. I'm leaving you everything because you're the only one who ever visited me without wanting something in return. Use this money wisely. Protect yourself, and when she comes back, and she will come back, don't let her take anything more from you. You've already given her enough. Walter, I folded the letter, slipped it back into the envelope, and looked at David. What do I need to do to protect this? Well, establish a trust immediately, David replied. Separate accounts, legal barriers, everything documented and time-stamped. By the time anyone realizes what's happened, it'll be untouchable. I stood up, shook his hand. Let's get started. Walking out of that office, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not relief, not satisfaction, just quiet, deliberate control. The text came first. Short, casual, like we were old friends catching up. Hey, heard you were at Giovanni's last week. Hope you're doing well. I stared at the message for a full minute before deleting it without responding. Eleanor was fishing, testing whether I'd bite. I wouldn't. 2 days later, she called. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice was lighter than I'd heard in years, almost playful. Arthur, it's me. Just want to check in. We should talk. There are some things we need to discuss about the kids. Call me back. The kids were 28 and 25. They didn't need us to discuss anything about them. This was reconnaissance. I didn't call back. Then came the ambush. I was at First National Bank meeting with a private banker David had recommended to help manage the trust accounts when I caught a reflection in a glass wall of the conference room. navy blazer that practiced posture, and beside her, a man in a gray suit carrying a leather portfolio. I turned slowly. Eleanor stood in the bank lobby with Simon Vance, her attorney, both wearing expressions that tried to look casual but landed somewhere between predatory and desperate. "Arthur," Eleanor said, approaching with her signature smile. The same one she used to wear when she wanted something. "What a coincidence. I didn't know you banked here." "I don't," I replied evenly. "What do you want, Eleanor?" Simon Vance stepped forward, extending his hand. I didn't shake it. He withdrew smoothly, undeterred. "Mr. Stone, I'm Simon Vance. I represent your ex-wife. We were hoping to have a brief conversation about revisiting the terms of your divorce settlement." "The divorce is final," I said, keeping my voice level. "There's nothing to revisit." "Well," Simon continued with practiced smoothness, "given certain changes in your financial circumstances, we believe an amendment would be appropriate. Fair even." So they knew somehow they found out about the inheritance. Probably through probate filings or mutual connections. The question was how much they knew and how much they were guessing. Eleanor's smile widened slightly. "Arthur, come on. We were married for 22 years. Don't you think it's only right that we share an unexpected good fortune, especially when it involves family money?" I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out a business card, and held it out to Simon. David Chin's contact information embossed and raised letters. "Any questions you have can go through my attorney," I said calmly. Simon took the card, his smile tightening. He recognized the name. David Chin wasn't just any attorney. He was the kind who showed up when you meant business. "Arthur," Eleanor said, her voice losing some of its warmth. "You really want to do this? Make this adversarial." I looked at her fully. "You made it adversarial when you filed those papers 3 months ago, smiled at me, and walked away with everything. I'm just protecting what's mine now." Her face tightened. Simon placed a hand on her arm, signaling retreat. "We'll be in touch, Mr. Stone." They left. I returned to the conference room, and we continued setting up accounts Eleanor would never touch. The motion to reopen the divorce settlement arrived 2 weeks later. Thick envelope delivered by courier. Simon Vance had crafted arguments about undisclosed assets. Emotional duress claims that I'd hidden my relationship with Walter. Creative fiction, well-written, completely baseless. David and I met to review the filing. He spread the pages across his conference table like he was dissecting a poorly constructed argument. "They're reaching," David said, tapping a paragraph with his pen. "This relies on proving you knew about the inheritance during the marriage. Can they prove that?" "No," I said, because I didn't know. Walter never told me. "But you visited him regularly," David noted. "Because he was family," I replied. "Eleanor refused to come after the first year. Said he gave her the creeps." David made notes. "We'll document that. I want to introduce evidence that your ex-wife specifically requested the future assets clause in the divorce agreement." He pulled out the original settlement with Eleanor's handwritten notes in the margins. One section was highlighted, her writing clear. "All future income, inheritances, and acquisitions remain separate property of respective parties." She wrote this herself, David explained. Insisted on it to protect her salon earnings. She can't have it both ways. Over the next week, David assembled demolition-level evidence. Bank records showing Walter's estate planning began 18 months before the divorce. Notarized letters documented my visits. Email exchanges proving I was unaware of his plans. The strongest piece was a video Walter recorded 6 months before his death. David played in his office. Walter sat in his library, voice thin but steady. "I'm leaving everything to Arthur because he's the only person who visited me without expecting anything in return," Walter said on the recording. His wife Eleanor made her contempt for me clear. "Call me outdated, irrelevant. Arthur never did. He sat with me, listened, fixed things without being asked. That's the kind of man who deserves what I built." The video ended. Silence filled the room. "They can't fight this," I said. "No," David agreed. "They can't." The counter motion was filed 3 days later. Simon Vance called David within hours. Their conversation was brief. Simon withdrew the motion. No hearing, no arguments, no second chances. Eleanor had lost before she started. That night, I opened a beer in my apartment. Not celebration, just acknowledgement. The battle I hadn't wanted was over. Sarah called me on a Sunday morning, her voice tight, with something between anger and betrayal. Dad, we need to talk. Can you meet me at the diner? 20 minutes later, I slid into the booth across from her. My daughter looked exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes. Coffee cup gripped like a lifeline. Mom's been lying, Sarah said without preamble. About everything. I waited, letting her find the words. I was going through some old files at the firm. Sarah continued, her voice shaking slightly. Estate documents, probate records. Dad, I found correspondence between Uncle Walter, attorney in our office. It's dated 2 years ago, 2 years before the divorce. My stomach tightened. What kind of correspondence? Questions about inheritance law, specifically about protecting assets from marital claims, Sarah explained. Uncle Walter was planning this long before Mom filed. He knew what she was doing. What do you mean what she was doing? I asked carefully. Sarah pulled out her phone, scrolled through photos, then turned the screen toward me. Bank statements, credit card receipts, all in Eleanor's name. Charges at expensive restaurants I'd never been to. Hotel rooms in the city. Receipts from a jewelry store for men's items I'd never received. She was having an affair. Dad, Sarah said quietly. With Paul Mason, your old business partner from the supply company. The name hit me like cold water. Paul Mason. The guy I'd helped get his contractor's license 15 years ago. The guy who borrowed my truck when his broke down. The guy who'd been at our house for barbecues and birthday parties. How long? I managed to ask. At least 2 years, Sarah replied. Maybe longer. I found text between her and him going back to before she filed for divorce. She was planning to leave you for him. The divorce wasn't about growing apart, Dad. It was about her upgrading. I sat back in the booth processing all those late nights at the salon, the conferences that never seemed to have any follow-up. The way she'd started dressing differently, speaking differently. She hadn't been evolving. She'd been auditioning for a different life. Does Mark know? I asked. Sarah shook her head. Not yet. He's still defending her. Still thinks he gave up without trying. Maybe it's time he knew the truth. I said there's more, Sarah added, her voice dropping. Mom's been losing money fast. The salon's in debt. She took out loans against her share of the house to invest in some business venture with Paul. It failed. She's drowning, Dad. That's why she came after your inheritance. She's desperate. I looked at my daughter, saw the pain in her eyes. She discovered that her mother wasn't who she thought she was. That the narrative Eleanor had been selling was fiction. I'm sorry you had to find this out, I said gently. I'm not, Sarah replied firmly. I needed to know the truth, and so does Mark. That evening, Sarah called her brother. I wasn't on the call, but she told me later that Mark had gone silent when she laid out the evidence, the affair, the financial lies, the calculated timing of the divorce. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, harder. 2 days later, Mark showed up at my apartment unannounced. He stood in my doorway, hands shoved in his pockets, looking like he'd aged 5 years and 48 hours. I'm sorry, Dad, Mark said, his voice rough. I believed her. I thought you just gave up. Come in, son, I said, stepping aside. We sat in my small living room, the silence heavy between us. Finally, Mark spoke. She played all of us, he said. Made herself the victim. Made you the quitter. And I bought it. You believe your mother, I replied. That's not a crime. It is when you're wrong, Mark said, looking at me directly. When you accuse your father of being weak when he was just being decent. I reached over, gripped his shoulder. We're good, Mark. We're good. My son nodded, but I could see the anger simmering beneath his composure. Not at me, at Eleanor. At the lies, at the manipulation. The family was fracturing along new lines now. And this time, the truth was doing the splitting. Eleanor's carefully constructed world began collapsing faster than she could rebuild it. Within a week of Sarah and Mark learning the truth, the social media posts stopped. The champagne photos, the empowerment captions, the curated life, all of it went silent. I heard through Sarah that Paul Mason had left town, moved to Arizona without warning, leaving Eleanor with debt from their failed business venture and no explanation. The man she traded 22 years of marriage for had disappeared the moment things got difficult. The salon she managed was sold to a regional chain. Eleanor wasn't offered a management, clears throat, position in the transition. She was let go with 2 weeks severance and a polite letter thanking her for her service. Her apartment, the high-rise with a view she'd posted so proudly, went up for lease. She'd fallen behind on rent, couldn't keep up with the lifestyle she'd been advertising. I didn't take pleasure in any of it, but I didn't feel sorry for her either. Sarah kept me updated, not out of gossip, but because she thought I should know. Mom's moved in with Aunt Susan. Sarah told me over coffee one afternoon. She's asking everyone for money. Says she's going through a rough patch. Is she? I asked. She's going through the consequences of her choices. Sarah corrected. That's different. Mark had stopped taking Eleanor's calls entirely. The betrayal ran too deep. He'd built his relationship with his mother on trust, and she'd obliterated it with lies. When she tried to reach out through social media, he blocked her. When she showed up at his office, security escorted her out. I'm done being her safety net. Mark told me when we met for lunch one day. She made her bed. She can lie in it. I understood his anger, but part of me worried about the bitterness taking root. Don't let her mistakes turn you into someone you're not. I advised you can cut her off without carrying hate. Mark considered that, then nodded slowly. You're better than me, Dad. I don't know how you stayed calm through all of this. I wasn't calm. I admitted I was just patient. There's a difference. The turning point came when Eleanor's lawyer, Simon Vance, withdrew from her case entirely. Sarah found the filing at work. A simple motion citing irreconcilable differences with the client. Translation: Eleanor couldn't pay him, and her case had no merit. Without legal representation, without money, without Paul, and without her children's support, Eleanor was alone with the reality she'd created. Then came the letter, handwritten, delivered to my apartment in a plain envelope. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. Arthur, the letter began. I know I have no right to ask anything of you. I know what I did. I know what I destroyed, but I'm asking anyway. Not for money, not for reconciliation, just for a chance to explain, to apologize, to acknowledge that I was wrong about everything, about you, about us, about what mattered. I threw away something real for something that looked shinier. And now I have nothing. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want to know I see it now. I see what I lost. Eleanor, I read the letter 3 times. Then I folded it carefully, placed in the drawer with all the other legal documents, and closed it. Some apologies come too late, not because they're insincere, but because the person receiving them is already moved forward. The past is only valuable if you're still living in it. I wasn't. That evening, David called with news. The probate on Walter's estate is finalized, he said. All assets are transferred. The trust is active. Everything's locked down tight. Good. I said, there's one more thing. David added, Walter's video deposition has been submitted to the county records as part of the estate documentation. It's public record now. Anyone can access it, which meant anyone could hear Walter's words about Eleanor, about her contempt, about her dismissal of family. It wasn't revenge. It was just truth preserved in an old man's voice, available for anyone curious enough to look. I thanked David and hung up. Stood by my window watching traffic move below. My life was smaller now in square footage, but larger in every way that mattered. I had my kids back. I had my integrity. I had $8 million I never expected, and the peace that comes from knowing I'd done nothing wrong. Eleanor had everything she thought she wanted, and it had cost her everything that actually mattered. The phone call came on a Thursday morning in November. Unknown number. New York area code. Mr. Stone, this is Helen Shaw from Chambers & Associates. I'm calling regarding a claim against Walter Reed's estate. A woman named Laura Reed claims to be Walter's daughter from a previous relationship. She's contesting the will. I sat up straighter. Walter never mentioned a daughter. That's common in these situations, Helen replied. She has documentation, birth certificate, letters, photographs. Her attorney is filing a formal challenge. I called David immediately. This happens more than you'd think, he said. Long-lost relatives appear when money's involved. We'll need to verify her claims and protect your inheritance. Over the next weeks, Laura Reed became real. She was 43, living in upstate New York. Walter had a brief relationship with her mother in the early 80s. When the pregnancy was discovered, he provided financial support but maintained distance. The question, David explained, is whether Walter intentionally excluded her or simply didn't update his will. He was meticulous. I argued if he wanted her included, she would have been. The legal battle dragged 3 months. Depositions, document reviews, investigations. Laura's attorney painted me as the opportunistic nephew who isolated Walter from his real family. Sarah attended hearings with me. This is what Mom hoped would happen, she observed. That the inheritance would become a nightmare. Maybe, I admitted, but I'm not giving up what Walter wanted me to have. The breakthrough came from Walter's longtime housekeeper. She brought a box of letters. Letters from Laura's mother dating back decades, asking for money, making threats, and Walter's responses, polite but firm. He provided child support, paid for Laura's education, but been clear he didn't want a relationship beyond financial obligation. The final letter, 5 years old, was from Laura herself. She'd asked Walter for a business loan. He declined, explaining he'd already fulfilled his obligations. David presented these in court. Walter Reed knew about Laura. He provided for her throughout her childhood and early adulthood. But he chose to leave his estate to Arthur Stone, the nephew who actually maintained a relationship with him. This was an informed, deliberate decision. The judge ruled in my favor. Laura's claim was dismissed. Walking out, I felt exhausted, but vindicated, not because I'd won money, but because Walter's wishes had been respected. Legal fees. I asked David. About $300,000, he replied. Worth it to honor what Walter wanted. That evening, Laura called me directly. Her voice was tired. I'm not apologizing. I believed I had a right to something. You did have something. I replied. Walter made sure you were educated, supported. But inheritance isn't about biology. It's about connection. She was quiet. He really cared about you, didn't he? Yes, I said simply. And I cared about him. We hung up without animosity. Two people who had fought over an old man's money and discovered it was never really about the money at all. 8 months after Walter's death, I stood in front of the Reed Community Center watching construction crews finish the building. The plaque read Walter Reed Memorial Center dedicated to teaching trades and building futures. I'd used $2 million of the inheritance to establish this place. A training facility for young people interested in plumbing, electrical work, carpentry, scholarships for those who couldn't afford tuition, job placement programs with local contractors. Sarah stood beside me. You would have loved this, she said softly. I hope so, I replied. My business had expanded. 3 more plumbers, 2 new trucks, commercial contracts. Not because I needed money, but because I enjoyed the work, building something, fixing things. Mark joined a business 6 months ago after years in sales management. He decided he wanted something more tangible. We worked together 3 days a week, and I taught him everything Walter had taught me. I'm sorry I doubted you, Dad. Mark said one afternoon while replacing a waterman. Sorry I believed her story instead of trusting you. Water under the bridge. I told him you're here now. That's what matters. Eleanor had disappeared from our lives. Last I heard, she was in Florida working retail, rebuilding from nothing. I felt no satisfaction in her downfall, but no sympathy either. The house we shared sold at auction. I drove past once. A young family had bought it, swing set in the backyard, toys on the lawn. Life continuing. I never remarried. Dated occasionally. Nothing serious. At 60, I'd learned solitude isn't loneliness. I had my work, my kids, my community center, my Tuesday morning coffee with contractor France. Sarah got married in spring. When she hugged me afterward, she whispered, "Thank you for showing me what integrity looks like." That meant more than any inheritance. One Sunday morning, reading the newspaper, I noticed a small article. Local salon chain files for bankruptcy. The company that bought Eleanor Salon had collapsed. I thought about calling Sarah, then decided against it. Some people's failures aren't worth tracking. Instead, I drove to the community center, walked through workshops where students learned to thread pipes and install fixtures, watched them struggle, succeed, learn the same lessons Walter had taught me. One kid, maybe 19, fought with a stubborn connection. I walked over, showed him the technique Walter had shown me 40 years ago. There, I said when it clicked. Feel that? Yeah. The kid grinned. I got it. Good. Now do it again until you don't have to think about it. I left him practicing. Walked outside into afternoon sunshine. My truck was parked nearby, dented and reliable. My phone buzzed with a message from Mark about supply orders. This was my life now. Smaller than Eleanor had wanted, bigger than I'd expected. Built on foundations that couldn't be shaken because they were made of skill, honesty, and relationships that mattered. Walter had given me $8 million. But the real inheritance was the lesson underneath. That wealth without character is just numbers on paper. That sometimes the people who walk away do you the biggest favor of your life. I climbed in my truck, started the engine, and drove toward whatever came next. And I drove it with my head held high.